Hi, welcome to the 14-day weather forecast. It looks like a big change is on the way. So without further ado, let's see how things may develop as we head through the Christmas period and towards the new year. Now here's a view at 18 GMT on Tuesday the 16th of December. Basically the weather is coming in from the Atlantic, and as I run the sequence what we see is further wet and windy periods affecting all parts of the UK. There could be some heavy rain around at times. That continues to be the case into the weekend, but then it's a big change which starts developing because high pressure is starting to become more influential. At this point, at 12 GMT on Sunday, an area of low pressure is still keeping things quite changeable, especially over the southern half of the UK. But watch how that high pressure to the northeast builds and we get an easterly flow developing. Often a very cold wind direction in the winter months, but there are caveats to that because what we see on this sequence is the 850 HPA temperature forecast associated with the same ECM model run, the UK inside the red circle. Remember, it's blues and purples which indicate cold air aloft. So running this, weather coming in from the Atlantic, and then we do get this easterly flow as I've already shown, but there isn't really much cold air in the mix there. Very, very little cold pooling to the east of the United Kingdom at the present time. You can see just a little bit of blue shading there pushing into northeastern Scotland, but although we've got an easterly, the temperatures aloft are actually, according to this, at this point at least a little bit above the long-term average. So there is lots taking place, and I'll be looking at how things may develop, particularly through the second week a bit later on as usual. Just coming back to the short term though, the UKV charts. These are for Wednesday, and temperatures at this point close to the average, shown on the left here, maybe quite mild in Northern Ireland. And we've got outbreaks of rain pushing across the UK, so going southeastwards really, and there are some heavy bursts, especially in the west. Forwards to Thursday, it's quite mild, double figures in the south, but there are these heavy outbreaks of rain moving northeastwards across the UK through the day, and then drier conditions returning from the southwest, although there are some heavy showery outbreaks of rain there, squally ones moving across the northern part of the UK. By Friday, temperatures once more still close to the average, and there's quite a lot of bright weather around, but some showers, some wintry precipitation there over the Scottish mountains. Nothing unusual at this time of year, of course. So not too bad a day all in all for much of the UK. Then as we go into the weekend, temperatures haven't really changed a great deal. It's still close to average or a little bit above, especially in the southern half of the UK, maybe close to average there in the north. It's several degrees lower. But it's quite a changeable or unsettled pattern with outbreaks of rain there, showery spells of rain moving in from the west. So it's a very changeable theme through the first part of the first week at least. On Sunday and Monday, using data from the GFS, it's staying quite changeable. Further outbreaks of rain, according to this, on Sunday and on Monday too, with low pressure probably still having quite a lot of influence by this point. And temperatures not varying much at all. The overnight values will be fluctuating. Patchy frost is quite possible at times, but over the week as a whole, I think the risk of frost is below the long-term average for this time of the year. You can see on the middle chart there, that's the minimum forecast values for Thursday morning, not falling below 10 degrees in parts of southern and central England. Although it is colder at that point in Scotland, the Scottish Glens seeing patchy frost on several nights through the first week. In the south, that risk of frost is significantly lower, of course. It's going to be windy, as has been the case recently. I'm just using a couple of charts here to illustrate the potential. Don't focus on the details. They still firm up, of course, as the lead time shortens. But on the left, we've got a chart for Wednesday, and on the right, Friday. In general terms, the strongest winds will continue to be in northern and western parts of the United Kingdom, as these show. As I've already mentioned, with the UKV charts, the temperature's not particularly exciting through the first week, not particularly high, a little bit above the average frequently, but not especially so, not like they were earlier in the month, and certainly not very low. You can see the forecasts here are for London. There's just that one night actually where ground frost at least, could develop, and then there isn't a great deal of diurnal variation, probably quite a lot of cloud around, so the overnight low is not much lower than the maximum daytime values. As you can see, if you're going to get lots of clear periods at this time of year, you would expect these graphs to be like a sine wave pattern as temperatures rise during the day and then fall away sharply at night, but you're not seeing that here. It is worth noting though that towards the end, the range of solutions starts to increase, the lines are diverging, so there is a bigger spread in the ensemble, and that's when things are starting to become more uncertain. A similar picture in Edinburgh, nothing at all notable early on, but towards the end here on this graph, from around the 20th or 21st of December, there's an increasingly wide range of possible outcomes. So that highlights a growing uncertainty. Rainfall, some heavy rain around through the first week. These are the aggregates from the ECM and GFS models, so the 5-day totals in millimetres. Wettest in the west, as has been the case for much of the time recently. But with that said, there is some significant rain also in central areas. Lower totals there in eastern Scotland, northeastern England, East Anglia and the southeastern corner. So a very typical rainfall distribution when the weather's coming in from the Atlantic. The 10-day charts show values increasing, not dramatically so. They were already quite high after the first 5 days, but they have ticked up further. The profile, the distribution of rain remains virtually the same. So perhaps turning more settled in the day 5 to day 10 part of the forecast period. What do the deterministic models show more generally as we head towards the end of the first week? Here's the GFS, Tuesday the 23rd of December, so the day before Christmas Eve, and at this point at least, low pressure is still dominant, but we've got that high pressure there to the northeast. The blue shading, the purple shading, indicates where the really cold air is. Now this week I've got a brand new computer model to show you. It's the AI version of the GFS. It's just becoming available, and apparently the verification statistics for this one are very good, although I haven't seen them myself. It is what I've read. What it shows, though, on this update is high pressure centred to the northeast of the UK and more of an easterly flow starting to develop. But once more, the greens and yellows there over the UK indicate at this point at least the air mass aloft is a mild one. The Canadian model, quite a messy picture with high pressure there to the northeast, more of a southeasterly flow moving across the UK, but once more the 850 HPA temperature values are quite high. In fact, there's a notably warm pulse of air just here to the southeast of the United Kingdom over France and Germany. The German icon, high pressure to the north, an east or southeasterly flow moving across the UK, but there's orange and yellow shading just to our south. The cold air is a long way from the United Kingdom at this point. The ECM model also has high pressure there to the northeast. This is the one that I used for the animations at the start. The upper air temperatures are quite high, or close to normal at least. The artificial intelligence version of the ECM looks a little bit different, but the broad scale pattern is quite similar. It's starting to look more blocked, although there is a disturbance here which is likely bringing some rain in from the west, weakening as it moves into that area of high pressure. And finally, the UK Met Office Global It also builds high pressure to the northeast, and we've got this east or southeasterly flow, mild air aloft, despite the winds coming in from the continent. So I think taking those together, what can be said is there's good agreement for high pressure to start to become more influential as we head towards the end of the first week. It's quite probable that a continental flow will start to feed in, so an east or a southeasterly, but at this time the air temperatures aloft will be relatively high because there is a distinct lack of cold pooling over the continent at the moment. So that doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be mild at the surface. We can get cold conditions if it becomes very calm and skies clear, because the ground quickly loses its heat and the air at very low levels chills rapidly in that case. So we get a temperature inversion where it's colder at the ground level than it is aloft. But these charts don't really support that idea at the moment because there is quite a brisk flow, so there's a lot of mixing taking place. The air at low levels is mixing with the air at high levels, so as it cools, if it does, then it gets mixed out with the higher temperatures, the warmer air aloft. So this does signal a significant change, but it doesn't look particularly cold by any means at this point. Will it turn cold as we head through the second week? Well, of course, it's just about the trends and probabilities at this range using the ensemble data. I'll start with the 16-day GEFS plot for London as usual. 850 HPA temperatures across the top. The thick purple line, the ensemble mean, is staying close to the thick black line, the 30-year average. But, as I've already indicated, that doesn't necessarily translate to temperatures at the surface for the reasons I've just discussed. And also, there is a big spread of outcomes here. Some runs are bringing in significantly colder air, others quite a lot milder. You can see the thick green line there was the GFS operational. That managed to develop quite a potent, relatively potent easterly flow for a time. But the point to take on board is that when these lines are diverging, don't place a lot of stock in any one given run. It suggests a high degree of uncertainty about, I suspect in this case, exactly where the high pressure is going to become centered. What can be said though is that it looks mostly dry, so high pressure will be having a good deal more influence. There are a few spikes in there, precipitation spikes, but they're not very abundant and they are not very big. And for the first time, I think this winter for London, I am going to mention the snow row because the values there increased. They reached 9 at the very end, so I think on New Year's Eve or New Year's Day, 5 and 4 earlier in the second week there. So it's a low risk of snow, but it's increasing later on as we head towards the new year. I also wanted to bring up this chart. This is from the European ensemble. These are freely available on the weatheroutlook.com website. I actually think they give more insight into the potential for snow than the GEFS snow row values do. And it's an ensemble plot from the European model. It's actually for Berkhamsted rather than London. So I've jumped out of London into the Chilterns, which happens to be where I live, but I wanted to see if I could get some slightly more favourable percentage chances of snow, because that's what these values are indicating inside this box. It actually breaks down snow, wet snow, sleet, rain, of course, and ice pellets, all the percentage, the percentage of runs in the ensemble which are forecasting those precipitation types at the given time, and also, of course, whether they are going for a dry outcome at that moment. And the best I can really do here is a snow risk of about 20%. It's lower in London, so in the Chiltern area, according to this, it reaches about 20%. And I think that's actually quite representative for a number of locations in the UK. It doesn't really increase substantially as you head northwards. So it would tend to indicate that an easterly flow, if it does turn cold, is likely to be the culprit rather than an Arctic blast from the north. So A low risk of snow, but maybe increasing. Jumping back to the 2-metre temperatures using the GEFS data tables for London, there is a trend towards colder conditions. The amount of dark green in these columns increases as we head through the second week, so reaching over 70%. Those runs going for maximum daytime values of between 1 and 5 degrees, and the nights are turning colder as well. There's more blue towards the end, sub-zero runs, so they would give a chance of air frost developing. So the trend is towards colder conditions through the second week in the southeast. It's a similar pattern in Manchester, not a great deal of difference at all. Here are the 2-metre temperatures for Manchester. According to this, at least the risk of nighttime frost is greater than it was in London towards the end of the second week, but the general trends are very similar indeed. Up to Glasgow, and it's the same once more. There's a big spread of 850 HPA temperature forecasts, but it's often dry, certainly a lot drier than it has been recently. The snow row values there, not that different to the ones in the southeast, and just reinforcing the message that the colder conditions, should they develop, are going to be coming in from the east rather than the north. The 2-metre temperature data tables for Glasgow following similar trends, probably becoming quite cold, although of course in this part of the UK the averages are lower than they are in the southeast, so relative to that norm, fairly close to the average, fairly close to it or maybe a bit below it, and a growing risk of frost. Lots of blue in those columns indicating overnight lows. Rainfall through the second week. These are certainly useful on this update. They show the percentage chance of 5 or more millimetres of rain falling on the first 3 days. They're generated from the European Ensemble. A big difference to many of my recent updates, which have had orange and red covering much of Western Britain and Northern Ireland. Here we've got the light blue over more or less all parts of the UK, so between 0 and 20 to 30% chance of 5 millimetres or more of rain falling on any of those days. So much drier than has been the case for a number of weeks. And going forwards to the next 3 days, the chance of significant rain increases a little bit in the northwest. It could be down to ensemble spread, as I often say when we're going this far ahead. It may also be that the high pressure area is starting to fray around the edges. Nonetheless, it does look dry in most of the United Kingdom throughout the second week. At least when I say it looks dry, there will be some precipitation around, but probably not a great deal. That's reinforced by the mean surface level pressure data table for York. So we're going through week 2 here. The oranges are dominant. Those are indicating runs which are strongly high pressure controlled. So 1026 to 1040 millibars. There are even a few of these red runs starting to show up. Those are ones which are going for over 1040 millibars. What about low pressure dominated runs? Hardly any at all. So a strong signal here for it to become more settled, the risk of precipitation reducing, and it doesn't look like a sort of flash in the pan, just a couple of drier days. The signal is for those drier conditions, more settled conditions, to become established and to continue until the end of 2025. The snapshot mean surface level pressure chart from the GEFS model for Friday the 26th of December, Boxing Day, has high pressure dominating the scene over the UK. You can see here the mean 850 HPA temperatures are not particularly low by any means. There's the North Sea isotherm, the blues mostly to the north, but it's always worth remembering with these charts they are generated just by averaging out all of the individual runs. So if that high pressure is really centered somewhere up here and we do get more of an easterly flow, it could be at this point when we start pulling in significantly colder air aloft. And the European model is a little bit more favourable if that's what you're hoping for. it has a high pressure centred more or less just to be a little bit to the northeast of the UK, and an easterly flow moving across the south. But once more, it is the average of all of the runs in the ensemble model. So a big change is on the way. It looks like turning more settled and possibly more wintry, but let me try and summarise. Week 1, wet and windy spells continue through the first half of the period, but it probably begins to turn drier later. Temperatures fluctuate, but often close to or slightly above the average. Week 2, a good deal of dry weather. Temperatures are expected to dip and it could become cold. Therefore, an increasing risk of frost and fog as high pressure dominates. There is an increasing risk of snow, but it probably remains quite low throughout the second week. Maybe towards the end that chance starts to become more significant, and there are 1 or 2 outlier runs which bring in the possibility of snow a little bit earlier in the second week, which of course would coincide with the Christmas period. So there we have it. High pressure is on the way back. More settled weather, therefore, is expected to return. Temperatures dip. Is it going to become very cold? Is there going to be snow around? Well, neither of those possibilities are discounted, but I think at this stage, at least, the emphasis, the focus is really on that transition towards more settled weather. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video and found it useful. Then as ever, if you did, please consider hitting the like button below and subscribing to the channel if you haven't done so already, because in that way you'll not miss any of my future updates. And there will be another Christmas special to look forward to later this week. It may or may not be the last one. As you've probably noted from this forecast, there is quite a lot of uncertainty about how things will develop through the second week. And if that's not resolved by Thursday, Friday or Saturday, I may therefore do another Christmas video just at the last moment early next week, so possibly 2 to go. We'll see. Anyway, thank you very much for watching this, and remember to stay up to date with the day-to-day developments by checking out the weatheroutlook.com website.